she began a journey to find him, but she didn't know when to stop.
Go home. Forget you ever had a son.
Get out of my room!
Starring Marie-Christine Barrault and John Hargraves. The Lizard King, 8:30 Sunday on ABC.
Tonight's programme is the first in a series of 5 films about Australian women, made by Australian women. And not only are they directed by women, but in most cases all the other highly skilled tasks from cinematography to editing have been performed by women. Now this does not mean that the films are strident feminist tracts. I believe men will enjoy them just as much as women, but I doubt whether men would have chosen these particular subjects, or if they had, would have treated them in the same way. Tonight's film is about the novelist Elizabeth Jolley, a migrant from England who settled in Western Australia and who is now recognised as one of Australia's most important writers. The film was written, directed and produced by Christina Wilcox, who's built an impressive reputation as a documentary filmmaker. I had the pleasure of playing 2 of Elizabeth Jolley's fascinating and eccentric characters, but the real star of the film is Jolley herself. The film's title is taken from the first line of one of her best-known novels, Miss Peabody's Inheritance. The nights belong to the novelist.
Her evenings had become another world, a world of magic and enchantment. She lived for the evenings and for times spent with the novelist's letters. The nights belong to the novelist.
$10,000 by what is described as the shortest possible half nostril is Elizabeth Jolley for
Congratulations, Elizabeth. It's lovely. Nice, really lovely that my wife loves it.
Thank you.
Good. Few words.
Thank you. I haven't really any messages I'm not that sort of person, you know, to speak messages, but usually I have written on my wrist a warning not to sign any contracts without taking them away to read. That just slipped off here. There's no proper ledge, you know. I don't have any room on my wrist to write all the thanks that I would like to offer. I'm very grateful to be here from Western Australia. You know, we have to come an awful long way. We have to cross either oceans or deserts, and in order to get anywhere. And I feel that this enormously generous prize from the Premier of New South Wales is a great honour and I'm going to go back to Western Australia and boast, but I don't expect anybody will notice me, but I'll do my best. I wrote all my life without being published. I tried to get published, but quite late on, the middle 1960s. Nothing was ready to submit for publication. You see, it's one thing to write, one thing to keep a journal, one thing to craft from a journal into stories, then another thing is to get something absolutely ready for publication. I mean, people often don't understand that. And I wrote a great deal, and I must have had about 25 stories finished before I actually submitted. But for everything I sent out, I mean, one year I sent out 39 times. I've got lists of them all. I would have had nothing accepted that year. I didn't get into Westerly, for example, at all between 1973 and 1979. It's an awful long time, and Westerly is our journal. The ABC took short stories, but they couldn't take very many. BBC World Service took the most short stories. They took them very regularly. The radio drama, though it's only heard once, enabled me to have stories to submit for publication in a book, because they then had a value, because everything had already been approved of by somebody else. So that gave the collection a strength. And I wrote Woman in a Lampshade, for example, first as a radio play.
It's 10 to 9, and now we present today's reading, Woman in a Lampshade, a short story by Elizabeth Jolley, read to us by Ruth Cracknell.
One cold, wet night in July, Jasmine Treadwell took several sheets of paper and her typewriter, together with a quantity of simple food and some respectable wine, and, saying goodnight fondly to her dozing husband, she set off in search of solitude. "I'm going up to the farm," she said. "I'll be home first thing on Monday morning," she promised.
It was not her custom to give lifts to strangers. Indeed, because of reported bashings and murders in lonely suburbs, she had, in an impulsively tender moment, promised the elderly professor that she would never pick up from the roadside any stranger, however pathetic or harmless his appearance. Come on, hop in. You awake? I say, are you awake? God, how sound did the young sleep.
What?
A young man, would you mind moving over a bit, please? The typewriter's falling off my knee. It's giving me the most awful cramp, and I'm getting a sore back.
I'm sorry.
And not too far, you'll drop off. Ah, careful, mind the typewriter. Oops, thought it was gone that time.
Terribly sorry.
That'll do beautifully. I've got this young man. He's in a suburban post office in Australia. Can you imagine him? Behind the counter, with his pale, offended eyes, looking as if he might burst into tears, with the veins and capillaries flushing on his crooked, boyish face. Then I've got him in this depressing hotel in India, where these two women are. One of them has a frightful disease. It's not a very nice subject, actually, but as a writer, I have to look closely at life and every aspect of it. C'est un triste métier.
I rather like to have a character who is a writer, partly because one can make a bit of a joke about something which is really rather awful, but I think that really I shall have to give up writing about writers.
I get very hungry when I'm writing.
I'm sure there's plenty of the eccentric about me, but perhaps I don't face it, you know, that I must have smooth paper. I can't have paper that's absorbent. I don't like writing on lined paper. I feel really hemmed in. Somebody once gave me some pads of paper out of kindness, but I couldn't write on it. I didn't tell them. I must have the household peaceful when I'm working. I can't go and work in my room if I feel that people are upset about anything in the house. That's always been the case. I can't work in my room at my novel or story if I haven't decided what I'm going to make for dinner, and if I haven't done the shopping and the washing. I just have to do the things that I am meant to do. I belong to an old-fashioned race where I feel that my duties of housewife and mother were the first things, and I still think that. I still do those things, and I feel very strongly about it. I don't mind if other people don't think that, but for myself that is important. I write nothing at all on paper some days except just a note. In fact, I'll even carry it to and fro between home and the farm or home and wait, and I won't get anything done but just carry it with me, you know. I'll often write, say, 3 pages, and then I'll have to do that all over again the next day. And I always try to leave off writing when I know what I'm going to do next, and I'll often scribble some notes underneath so that I don't come back to it not knowing what I'm going to do. But I'm compelled to make a note sometimes, and it can be very wearing just when you're going to sleep or if you're reading or doing something and you've got to leave what you're doing and to make a note. But I do think that this is very important, and a lot of people perhaps don't know how important it is. They think that they will write a novel when they've got time. But you need time, but you also need the material and the observation, really, to make the creation, to invent what you want to invent. I think the ability to make the quick note is really rather like the artist with the sketch, and I couldn't work without those little notes. I couldn't just sit down with a blank piece of paper and write. Well, this is the notes for the novel, The Lila Family, and as a rule, I don't write out a synopsis. It's not really a synopsis, it's just a set of notes where I actually wrote the whole novel through to the end. From the beginning, the first scene that was in my mind was the character eating radishes with salt from the palm of her hand, and she's sick after eating those radishes at the beginning, and she's sick again later on because she's pregnant, but it's discovered at the end that she already was pregnant. That may sound a little bit rough, just like that. The novel opens with some scenes with the Indian love call being sung in the bathroom by one of the characters, and then I wrote the actual last scene where they're trying to change a baby, a man and a woman who don't own the baby, and they're having rather a bad time. But then I got another ending, which I wrote in here, where the one character refers to Shakespeare doing the endings more satisfactorily. She's rather an intellectual character. It's the bringing together of things that seem to be quite unbringable together. And if you read through notebooks and journals, and you read through without any kind of filing system, you will often find that extraordinary things that you have written actually fit to different characters, and that things can be slotted together that you didn't expect. And sometimes a short story will suddenly come together from different little bits of writing, and this is the excitement of writing, when you realise that, rather like with Peabody, the story of Thorne and Edgeley fitted with the story of Peabody, and actually I was able to make a parallel between Edgeley and Peabody, and that was very exciting. Peabody goes to work rather drearily, but she does have little moments of irritation at work, and certainly a lot of irritation at home, and a certain routine where she does certain things certain days. Then She just timidly writes to the novelist in Australia where she, to describe a book that she's liked. And strangely enough, she gets back a flamboyant sort of letter, which then starts off this correspondence in which the novelist keeps sending large pieces of the novel that she's working on. And Peabody starts to step into another world and gets mixed between her own world of reality, which starts to change as she steps more and more into the unreality.
I have a headmistress in mind, a tremendously responsible sort of woman. The name of the headmistress is Dr. Arabella Thorne. She is known as Miss Thorne. Every afternoon she walks down from the schoolhouse through the warm fragrance of a small pine plantation. She always forgets about the pines, and then suddenly she is in the middle of the sandy, pine-needly place, walking on a little beaten path. It is surprising that she forgets because the school is called Pine Heights.
Gee, Mr. Crow. Thanks very much. Milk? And sugar? Yes, thank you. That's fine. Thanks very much.
No, girls. Now that's the one. I want you to observe the line of the body. Now, come on, over here. Go on. It's nice. Very nice. The sprightly kid was bounding on the rocks. The subtle monkey frolicking in the trees, and the solemn elephant posing in the shade.
I think a writer should be in control of characters. Sometimes people with very starry eyes will say, the characters have taken over, you know, and they're onto about their 12,000th page, where the characters have really taken over. On the whole, my characters don't take over. I make them, and I put them in situations and actually work out how they will, and see how they will work. The act of writing is really an exploration of human behavior, and the trying to understand it, I think, is part of why a person might write, or why I write. When I'm making a character, it may take me many years to write a character like Miss Thorne, or Laura in Palomino. I might scribble something down about someone or even about myself, and then I find that a character starts to be there, and sometimes just out of nothing a few words will come into my head that just match what a character would be like. Sometimes their faint memories from childhood offer me a character quite strongly. I used to love playing schools, and my sister and I we had a lot of dolls as well as dolls' houses, and they had families in them, and they had long dialogue that went between the houses and visitings and so on. And we also had other characters who travelled around the house in date boxes, like buses, and picked up characters, you know. In a sense, it was, in fact, the beginning of a great big long novel. And in fact, I think weekly, in newspaper of Claremont Street, comes directly from a celluloid doll that lived in my sister's doll's house. Her name was Joan, and she was too big to get in any of the beds, so she sat up all night on a little chair. But it's because of our games and our story writing when we were little that I think I went on writing. I mean, we played one long story, you know. From the age of 8 then, I was at home till I was 11, and then I was sent to a Quaker boarding school. My first year at school, I was terribly homesick and I was not at all happy, you know. I wrote stories, imagined things and sent them home to my sister. We went on with our game, you know. And bit by bit, I began to like school and I got to love it very much. I remember my mother and father very vividly and clearly. She was a very good and kind mother and clever, very fond of music, and very good with languages, but we didn't get on awfully well as I got older. I think she wanted a princess and she got me instead. My mother and father were pacifists, and it was partly because of him that the house was always full of the refugees. He was an idealist, you see. In the early 1930s, when people were leaving Europe for Britain, they were refugees, and they were the people that realized what was going on, and they came out well before the war. But of course, they were separated from their husbands and so forth, and a lot of weeping went on then, you know, in dark corners and so on. When I was at school and went home for the holidays, I never had a bed to sleep on because there'd be somebody in the room, you know. They gave hospitality to that extent. And I suppose those people, their sufferings and their sorrows, stayed in my mind rather, you know.
A wind blew through Europe. It blew stronger and ever stronger. Countless whirlwinds, spiralling and gathering, carried all that which was not fixed and secure upwards into the sky. And in this twisting movement, cones were formed, which, because of the intensity of the whirlwind, grew more and more compact as they moved higher and higher into the winds above the firmament. The clotted debris travelled far away into another hemisphere, and forgetting the winds, sank down to earth. Most of the cones, as they reached the earth, fell apart and mixed with the dust of the new place. Some did not do this. Even as they fell, they pressed closer and closer into themselves, as was their only means of surviving. In the new land, they were scattered like rocks, not mixing with the soil, but from time to time settling on the fragments of other such cones from which they drew sustenance in order to preserve themselves and remain unchanged for as long as possible.
I think there was a period of, say, well, in my case, it'd be about 2 years before I couldn't tell the difference between the seasons. They seemed to just merge without me knowing a difference, but now I can sense in the air the change in season. And I suppose wherever you move, even if it's in your own country, from one place to another, there's a sense of displacement. And I think many people do find it hard. But the family in Milk and Honey try desperately to hang on to their old way of living. And I think that probably prevents people from making the best of the next place that they go to. I call myself a West Australian writer. Though I'm an English woman, I've lived here for a long time now. We're all regional writers across Australia and all over the world. We all write from our region, but many of our themes are universal, so that you can have regional and universal mixed together, I think. I wrote Mr. Scobie's Riddle early in the 1960s when I was really quite overcome by certain aspects of working in nursing homes. Nothing wrong with the nursing homes, really, but just I found it very moving, and I wrote Mr. Scobie in the first person from his own point of view, and it was so unbearably sad that I sort of wept when I even looked at it, so I realized I couldn't have it as a novel like that. So I put it away and just worked on little bits. And Miss Haley appears in that first writing of Mr. Scobie's Riddle as just an old woman in the nursing home who stands in the middle of the hall and keeps shouting, "Is no one coming to fix this blind?" And she doesn't do more than that, but then later on I saw Miss Haley by the side of the road in a round hat talking to some people when I was driving by, and I realised that must be Miss Haley, and I rushed home and started to write her into the novel, and I rewrote the whole novel. I think that everybody is in some kind of imprisonment, and they make their own way through it or out of it as best they can. Some people are more aware of it than others. Haley, of course, is imprisoned. She's actually physically imprisoned in that hospital because Matron has taken all her money, as is her wont. There's also been the disgrace in the school that 2 students set her up with, and Haley is afraid of the outside world. She's dropped from being a headmistress. In fact, she is a possible end that could come to Thorne if you wanted to follow Thorne through, but I don't think so. I'm going to read a passage from Miss Peabody's Inheritance, where Miss Thorne and Miss Snowdon are on holiday in the wheat belt. Miss Thorne looks back to a solemn moment in the shower in a newly built motel in a remote township in the wheat.
Here we are then, Snow. Here, this one's yours. Those rooms over there have a good view, but this looks like ours here. Let's get in. Time for a scotch.
Miss Snowdon often adopts schoolgirl language when she is with Miss Thorne. Normally, Snowdon speaks in a kind of medical jargon, and you will notice that she and Thorne say gel and orf instead of girl and off. It's an affectation, but I don't think they are aware of this themselves. Excuse the brackets.
Why don't we take a shower?
Oh, super, Prickles. A water fight.
Oh, rather.
Come on, race you. This bathroom's very nicely tiled. Good strong jets of water, too.
Erotic. Rather. Oh, my dear, this is madness. But do go on.
Let's have the water just a bit warmer. Oh, wicked Prickles. Shall I soap you?
Of course you may do that again. As often as you like, you exquisite naughty. Oh, indecently exquisite.
Prickles, this is bigger than both of us.
You'd better hurry, dear.
Miss Peabody, in her airless and virginal bedroom, tried to make sense out of the letter, which was scrawled in red and blue ink. She tried to piece together something of the lives of Miss Thorne and Miss Snowdon. There was a lack of sequence, and she realized she must take each letter as it came and hope that in the end she would reach some sort of understanding. Miss Peabody did not touch alcohol, but on this occasion she had a little of her mother's medicinal brandy in a cup of hot milk. It was soothing. The water fight had disturbed rather. Love scenes are familiar, even repetitive, if you pick them out of context and read them all at once. The novelist ended her letter with a little lecture in green ink. But it is the circumstances, the going towards the love-making, and then the time afterwards, the thoughts you see, and the feelings which make the scenes memorable. Love scenes should be a whole lot of things. They can even be ludicrous. I mean, there is something ridiculous, isn't there, about a naked body? Now, the novelist continued, tell me all about yourself. Have you a small, straight, brave back? And are you in love? Tell me about your love, for I'm sure you are in love. Miss Peabody, even with 2 teaspoons of brandy in her milk, could not answer such intimate questions. It was exciting to be disturbed by the water fight. Who ever heard of such a thing? She thought of the mess in the bathroom and then wondered if it was possible to have a water fight by oneself. I think it's very interesting about this being said that it's an obsession, the lesbian relationship writing, because they don't seem to feel that I'm obsessed with old men in old people's homes, for example, or that I'm obsessed with death. I think that possibly there's a certain discomfort in the readers themselves about a subject. Therefore, they see it as an obsession in somebody who perhaps writes about it or mentions it. I think the things that I'm writing about are not new things, that feelings have been there and responses or lack of response have been there all the time. I'm only creating characters and writing novels and reflecting what I may feel a little bit in our society. People will do things for each other sexually that are not necessarily hopping into bed, that their behaviour, their cherishing of each other may in fact be a sexual expression, and I think that's very important and an ennobling one. And I think that very often it's part of the development of people in society that they need to make some sort of expression, and they don't necessarily want a return, and they don't necessarily need a physical relationship. And I think that's very important to try and understand that. I'm interested to explore it. I can't see myself as any of my characters at all. I regard them as fictitious. I know that they couldn't be there without my awareness of certain things, but I think sometimes people are disappointed that I am not the character that they might have expected, and then they find that the writer has no bearing on what they imagined from the character. Oh, wait, House, that's it. You poured me some wine. Yeah. Yes, I was very low. Yes, thank you. I shan't be long learning the names. The idea with this assignment is that you can start writing fragments either for there are 2 short stories, or if you don't want to do the short story, you can work on the novel during the 15 weeks if it appeals to you. If you find, you see, I don't expect you to finish a novel in 15 weeks, not by any means, but you can be working towards it. I mean, it'd take you 3 years to write a novel, or even longer, 10 years, you know. So it's a good idea to have your characters and start describing them, what they're like, and the kinds of things they do. Get the characters to write to each other, exchange recipes, put them in a situation and see how they react, and find out who's diminished and who's dominant, that sort of thing, do you see? One of the things you can do is to deepen your passage of writing, show more about the character by your choice of music. You may want to give a character a disco beat scene, you know, that kind of thing. And sometimes if you actually listen to some music of that sort and write your words while you're listening to the music, you then pick up a rhythm. Pick the piece of music that you feel fits your writing or the story, and perhaps deepen your character in that way. This is particularly important if you're going to be writing for radio, but this is a prose fiction class, and unless anybody is mad to write for radio during this 15 weeks, we shan't be doing that. When we used to go driving in the country, around the vineyards and into the hills, I would imagine what it would be like to have some land. And then when I got the idea that I really wanted some, I just couldn't stop looking at advertisements and rushing off to have a look. I'm very fond of the place, and during difficult times I will think about it and come here in my mind, so that it's a sort of consolation, even though it's heartbreaking as well, because instead of getting bigger and better, it's dwindling rather. I suppose farming interests me, and the small farmer, of course, is very close to his poultry and his fruit trees. I don't know, I just seem very fond of the noise of the poultry, very fond of the idea of cultivating, I suppose. The things that we grow here now are the citrus fruits, the peaches, the plums, nectarines, pears and quince and apricots. Early on, all the space between the orchard trees was full of broad beans, right from the top down to the bottom. We did sell fruit to start with, when we were up here much more, but then I decided that we wouldn't sell anything because of the responsibility of having a worm in a peach, you know. I would like to grow a crop, but I just can't manage it. I like to come and go for a walk sometimes, or I like doing things. I like walking up and down and doing things and thinking. And that is how I write to a large extent, is being in solitude, doing something, but at the same time thinking.
When I get back home, I want to walk along the dry creek bed and touch the dry, hard earth and break it with my fingers. I want to smell the hot earth, and I want to walk between the trees and smell them too. There is a silence in my life in the country which wraps round and somehow calms and comforts. I want to walk out alone in the quiet fragrance. I want to stand and look along the narrow paddocks where they lie sleeping between the fringes of the jarrah forest. I want to walk down to the paper barks and the she oaks and listen to the small whispering of the wind beside the dry creek bed.
While you're composing, you're a writer and reader yourself. As you do subsequent writings, you then start to consider the outside world reader, and you can't insult that reader. You can't offer something that's so painful that a person can't read it, so that you have to then think of some way of lifting the material, perhaps like black comedy, as in Mr. Scobie's Riddle. The next passage I'm going to read is from Mr. Scobie's Riddle, which is an extremely painful book. Mr. Scobie is in an old people's nursing home, and he's always trying to escape. He tries to get away. He's aged about 85, and Miss Haley is another inmate of the nursing home who she's 25 years younger than Mr. Scobie and rather fancies a bit of a relationship with him. She's a novelist, a failed novelist, had her novel rejected 42 times, and I'm going to read this particular passage where he is trying to escape. One morning, a few days later, Mr. Scobie, reassured by the discovery of a little money carelessly overlooked by Mrs. Rawlings in the inside pocket of his suit, set off for his daily walk. He set off with a light heart. Plenty of walks, Mr. Scobie, the doctor said every time he came. Plenty of rest and plenty of little walks. Mr. Scobie supposed he had walked more than the doctor ever would walk. Oh, wait for me. He recognized the familiar voice.
Mr. Scobie!
Miss Haley, with an enormous lilac shawl thrown over her gown, came loping along behind him, the pink tassels on her slippers dancing madly.
Mr. Scobie! Oh, Mr. Scobie.
Mr. Scobie turned off into a small park. Not only was it a short cut to the terrace, but it provided a certain convenience for him. His injection, he found, was still active, and he was more than glad to see the welcome black and white sign beyond, half hidden in some trees. "Excuse me," he muttered. "Oh, but of course," Miss Haley said in her alert way. She was quick to understand. "Go ahead, I'll wait, down there on the grassy slope," she said. She stood with her back to the square building. She tried to look unconcerned. In her deep voice, she hummed the center theme from The Flying Dutchman.
La la la, dee 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 dee.
"Ah, Wagner," she said aloud, her voice reaching over the grass to astonished shopping ladies who paused under their parasols, resting on laden or unladen shopping trolleys, depending on the direction they were facing. Miss Haley sang a little louder. She would have liked to simulate the storm. It was there in her head, but it was not possible to know how it would emerge.
La 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 la. The voice, you know, at my age, not only is it entirely unpredictable, but it lacks power. In any case, a Wagnerian storm requires full orchestration. So what can a humble voice do?
She tried the horns and produced a sound so remarkable she became more ambitious.
La, 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 la.
Self-conscious, suddenly, as more people were passing, she lowered her singing by an octave. Singing under her breath, she produced sounds quite unlike anything within the range of human possibility. Miss Haley waited, singing for several hours. Occasionally, she wondered if Mr. Scobie was all right. Somewhat perplexed, but with excellent manners, she continued to sing outside the men's toilet. Sometimes she paced up and down, keeping her balance very well on the grassy slope. Mr. Scobie, she told herself, would come out in his own good time. And I've used Centre's theme because in The Flying Dutchman, the condemned Dutchman is doomed to sail the seven seas forever, and whenever the ship gets in sight of land, it swings round and goes away again. So it's a kind of endless thing that he's on, an endless voyage. So that Miss Haley's standing outside the men's toilet is an endless thing because Mr. Scobie, behind her back, has slipped out, hastily buttoning up his trousers, and makes for the railway station. And she stays singing there for the rest of that day and well into the night, and is brought home wrapped in a grey blanket, I think, if I remember rightly, that belongs to the milkman. When you have something that's rather hard to accept, such as extreme poverty or the pain of old age, the little dance in writing is something which will lift the message in a sense. I watched dancers and I really wanted to put onto paper the movement of the dance. And there's Debbie Frome's Dance of Seduction, and there's the girls dancing up and down the passage in Mr. Scobie's Riddle. There's the dance in Woman in a Lampshade, and of course there's Weekly and Miss Haley have a dance of a ritual of Thanksgiving. That's a different kind of dance. I cannot dance myself at all. I never learnt to dance. At the Quaker school we didn't dance, and I left school unable to dance, and I never learned. And I love watching dancing, and I think it's a wonderful way of expression, but I've tried to do it through the writing.
What is this dancing, Debbie?
It's disco, Miss Thorne. Here, I'll show you how.
No, thank you. No, thank you, Debbie. I'm too old for that sort of thing.
You're not too old, Miss Thorne. I like you just the way you are.
Now, Debbie, this dancing really must stop. The school corridor is not the place. It's far, far too late. Now, Debbie, time for you to go up to your room now. It's quite late. Now, come on. Do you understand that you realize how you feel? It's late, and now is not the time for the dance. Come on, Debbie. It's midnight. It's time for your beauty sleep.
Debbie Frome's dance, I hoped, would show that Debbie Frome had come to terms with her sexuality, which of course Miss Thorne, for all her knowledge, isn't quite sure about because she is tempted that night.
Good night. Now go to bed.
So the little dance can be brought in with a touch of humour or irony or satire or some lovely landscape and setting, light and shade, and the energy and rhythm of the actual prose. A character can be given a flashback of memory. You can even use the pluperfect and have had if you want to, and generally lift the grimness of human life. And I think that that's what I mean by the little dance.
Miss Haley danced a pine tree dance. She danced a dance of the majesty of the pines and their transfiguration in the changing light of the morning sun. She included in the dance a mysterious hill. She tiptoed round its base, indicating with expressive fingers and an arching of her eyebrows that though life was active at the foot of the hill, no one knew the secrets of the hill itself.
But I think that any writing that doesn't contain something that is exquisite in some way or another may just fall below a measure of acceptance. And I think that putting the magic in is perhaps one of the hardest things to do. But if you can manage it and really try hard to achieve something, it's a bit like a nice phrase of music that comes in and perhaps comes in more than once, so that it really gives a kind of satisfaction and a little touch of optimism. When Miss Haley does her idyllic dance on the veranda, that is a supreme moment for Miss Haley, and for me it redeemed Frankie and Robin and Miss Haley and the whole of the celebration of life, really. No, her beady eyes ran over the crew. That's the kind of mistake that people make with eyes. His eyes ran down her body, you know. Her eyes ran round the room. She threw her eyes to the ceiling. I get it all the time. We had one at school. She stirred her tea with a sigh. Haven't you heard that? His eyes ran down her dress.
Next in Women on Women, we'll follow the experiences of 3 families through pregnancy and childbirth. Labour of Love, next Thursday at 8:30. Stay with us now as Commander Crocker awaits his fate after suspension in the final dramatic chapter of The Detective.